Manjeet, welcome back to the Abhijit Chawda podcast. It's great to have you back on.
Thank you, Abhijit. I'm delighted to be here.
So, we're going to discuss this report, Momentum for Middle Powers, the
Yes.
Emerging Middle Powers Report 2025. We did a podcast previously about a year ago
Yes.
on the previous report.
Yes.
So, what is this report about and what's new?
What's new is two things have happened. First, Donald Trump was elected to be US president. B, the wars that have been ongoing for the last 2-3 years, the European war, which is the Ukraine-Russia war, and the war in Gaza-Israel war, now past their third years. And we can see that Europe has not been able to step up. So the rules-based order has now been exposed. And the big difference between last year and this year is that last year the rules-based order was still perceived to be there. This year, we know that the rules-based order is now broken and that a new order is waiting to take place. Now, the new order is not like the old order, but the multipolar order. There is not a unipole, and there is also, it's not a bipolar one
Not quite
either.
bipolar.
Not quite bipolar.
Yeah.
It is a multipolar order. And in fact, if you talk to experts who've been studying this, and particularly those who've been studying the Global South, they will tell you that the multipolar order was always there. It always existed. It's just that the new unipolar order or the unipolar world with these rules that they made were dominant. And they dominated the scholarship, they dominated the media, they dominated the multilateral institutions that talked about these things. They dominated global conversations. They dominated the business. And now all that has been receded, partly because the US understands that they have come to a point they cannot get jobs for their people. And unless they take back what they did, which is pass over everything to China and made it a factory of the world, unless they start being a more balanced economy, less financialized, more invested in the productive economy, that things are going to be very hard for them in the future. And therefore, Donald Trump has been elected. He has promised this to his people, and he is certainly doing his best to make it happen. And so this particular report assumes a greater salience because what is the base now of the world? The base of the world is what are called really middle powers are Australia, Canada, but they're still part of the G7. They're still part of the rules-based order.
Yes.
We've now got emerging middle powers, which are countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and Germany in some sense. Germany is still waiting to get into the UN Security Council. So these middle powers, emerging middle powers, have the heft now. They've got the knowledge. They have the economies. They have the intellectual capacity to start thinking about new rules. And therefore, some of them, like Germany, have to extricate themselves from the old rules.
Yes.
And some of us, for whom the old rules really were never fair, are trying to think about how we can write the new rules. And so this report talks about the emerging middle powers and what they stand for, how they think, how do they see themselves in this new era. And the results are sometimes, if you're from the Global South, expected.
Yes.
And sometimes they're unexpected. They kind of reaffirm what you already know. And sometimes they let the established order know what they knew but didn't acknowledge.
Right. So, before we move on, what's a rough heuristic definition of middle power? What's a middle power? How do we understand
A
what's
middle power is not a great power. A great power will be actually United States, Europe together would be
Economic.
a great economic, nuclear, military. So economic, military mostly, and security, socially in some sense, advanced societies. These are, so the West will be really United States and now China, which no matter what it says, it is a first world country. And Russia was a great power because it had great military capacity, great education, and it was. However, what comes next? What's below them? So within the G7, you've got the individual, some of the individual European countries. You've got Germany.
France.
It's really middle. France, Australia, Canada, some of those, Japan,
Yeah.
Korea.
Okay.
Some of those are the middle powers. They're part of the established order, and they're socially advanced, they are economically advanced, they're militarily advanced. And that's, I think, how it describes a middle power. But they don't really carry the clout that a great power does.
So how does it apply to us in Indonesia and nations like
So
such
we're
like
emerging middle
emerging
powers.
powers?
We're emerging middle powers.
Okay.
Indonesia is a very interesting country. So Indonesia, I've just come back actually from Bandung.
Okay.
Week before
Bandung.
last, Bandung.
Okay.
Bandung, because 18th of April, between the 18th and the 24th of April was the original Bandung Conference.
70 years it's been.
Yes, it's been 70 years, 1955.
Yes.
And that, if you look at the 10 Bandung principles, those principles are actually, when we were looking at it, they are perfect for the New World Order. At that time, however, we were all poor. Indonesia was only 5 or 6 years independent. India was 8 years independent. These were all emerging, decolonizing powers, former colonial powers coming together and dreaming of a world that was not what the established rules-based order was already taking place, right, in 1947. Already took place there. The rules had been established. Bretton Woods had taken place.
Yes.
The United Nations was coming into being.
The
But
Atlantic
without-
Charter had happened.
That's right. And between, actually, had it not been for these powers that came to Bandung, 29 countries, the UN would never have been formed because they were the ones that created the base. These are the base powers now of the world. Much of the world looks more like us than it does the great powers.
True.
And looks less like some of the LDCs, lesser developed countries than the others. But we're kind of middle of the road, middle powers. Indonesia has been, compared to all of us, and particularly India, Indonesia has been more interesting because it has been part of the trading regime for a long time. So Indonesia was also colonized by the Dutch,
Yes.
but because it's been part of Asia, it was also part of the Asian tigers. It had Suharto, all these Sukarno, all these countries, it had Suharto, Sukarno, they were all run by dictatorships, military dictatorships at some point, right?
Yes.
The democracy didn't quite last, they took over. So they then became Asian powers because you had that one decision maker.
Yes.
So they were the early Chinas in that sense. And when the collapse took place in the 1990s, they still had a strong infrastructure base.
They did.
And they had a strong trading base. They had run businesses. They already had a lot of billionaires. They'd seen success. They had started to educate their people. So they were doing quite well. Indonesia is really bookended by two countries that have helped it along tremendously. One is Japan and one is Australia. For Australia, because a lot of Indonesians go to Australia for education and Australia helps them. Japan, because it brought industrialization and trade to Indonesia. So Indonesia is now part of ASEAN. It has many, many friends there. During its G20 presidency, people worried, would Indonesia be able to pull it off? They all forgot that Indonesia has many friends in Asia. So they just picked up the phone, they called all the Asian connections, all part of ASEAN, they're trading friends, and they knew how to do it. So they already have established within Indonesia, the think tanks are well connected to the others. India is not in that position. We have not been trading for a long time. We're not a trading economy. We have been in no global trade regimes. For us, the East India Company was yesterday. We're not really thinking about it. And the trade agreements that we signed earlier, say, with ASEAN in early 2000s, etc., these have not served us well. And so consequently, we've been wary of trade. And as you know, we were supposed to join RCEP some years ago, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership with the other Asian countries, but it got set back because of dairy. New Zealand was part of RCEP, And they have fat cows, and they were going to under the agreement they could have been able to get their cows into India, produce all this milk, where we have skinny cows. But the milk cooperative is very, very powerful in India, and they said that they didn't want to be wiped out because we aren't just a dairy country; we are a cooperative. Every human being is behind an animal, and so
That's right.
it got set back, and Prime Minister Modi was determined to get into RCEP, but it didn't go through. And in retrospect, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea after all, because now India is in a good position to think about trade. And I'm digressing a little bit, but Australia, that was so helpful to Indonesia, has also shown up to be helpful to us. So in 2022, we signed a trade agreement with Australia.
Yes.
Australia, what it did something very unusual. It made it a two-part agreement. That the first part, they said, instead of saying, this is what we want, because India is not goods rich, but we are human capital rich.
Yes.
We're a services economy. And goods will come later as we unwind and understand what we can manufacture and what we can't. We have the knowledge, we have the capacity.
Yes.
But the suspicions were still very, very great. And so we have not deindustrialized. We've just not industrialized, right? So unlike the West, which is completely deindustrialized. And so Australia came and said, they didn't say, this is what we want and do the agreement for us. They said, what can you give us? And so we said, well, this is what we can give. This is what you can give. Education, we're giving our people. You come and help us set up education. We'll get your wine. We'll export you some of our other things. We've got standard exports, jewelry, textiles, all that stuff. And Australia agreed. And partly because it's had so much experience in Asia and Southeast Asia and also with China. It had a unique perspective. And so for them, it was what the US did, hitching their wagon onto a big Asian star, which is us, and letting it go easy. So they won our trust by saying, we'll do a two-part agreement, low-hanging fruits first, and then all the difficult stuff, the agriculture, government procurement, all those things we can do in the second part. The second part, first part was signed in 2022. And in fact, the utilization of that trade agreement has been quite good. It's a case study that we have written on the Australia-India two-part free trade agreement.
Okay.
And the second part will be signed this year, which is the tough stuff. Everybody has looked at it and they've seen this and said, okay, maybe we can do a similar trade agreement with India. They've understood what Australia did and people were shocked. India signed a trade agreement with Australia. How did you do it? Well, they did it by asking us what we could give them.
Yes.
And so the non-EU countries, called the European Free Trade EFTA, Free Trade Association, which is Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Norway.
Okay.
The four countries have just signed last year a trade and investment agreement with us.
Okay.
Where they have committed to invest $1 billion and also create 1 million jobs.
I see.
Now there is a long line. There's something 30 or 40 countries waiting to sign trade agreements with India.
Fantastic.
It's wonderful because now we've got confidence. And since we're in Mumbai, I should say that Piyush Goyal is a very, very good commerce minister because he has made this personal. The Australia trade agreement, he made it personal. He worked very closely with his counterpart and with all these. So now we are very close to getting a trade agreement with the US, which has been long pending, partly because the US kept demanding things that we couldn't give. We are going to be the first country to do a trade agreement with the US. It will be a bilateral trade and investment agreement, but we'll do it because we now have the confidence and we know what works. And everybody knows that you got to give India something in order to get it back. So
Right.
this is going back to Indonesia and India. These middle powers are now starting to understand their own weight. And that's why this report is very important.
Right. So, in what way was Gateway House involved in this, and what was the methodology of the report?
Yes. So Gateway House was involved. There are 4 think tanks involved. So Germany is the Kober Stiftung, it's the foundation. Gateway House from India, the South African Institute for International Affairs, which is South Africa's, maybe Africa's best think tank.
Okay.
And there is the BRICS Policy Center in Brazil.
Brazil.
We all got together. So Kober initiated it. And they've done, what we've done with this report is it's very unusual. It's a survey. Surveys are very expensive to do. They're hard to do. So we agreed to do this, provided they allowed us to write the questions.
Okay.
And so we got the first blank sheet of paper. We, at Gateway House, we wrote the first questions, and then we shared it with our colleagues in South Africa and Brazil. As it turns out, we really share the same views. We want the same, we have the same questions. We think similarly. And the Germans were so open-minded. They went with it. They said, absolutely, let's do it. And so we went through a long process with 3 or 4, 5 meetings, almost every month a meeting. And we took the questions all apart and we put them back together again.
Okay.
So it was purely consensus-based. Some which are very directed to Europe, some are directed to our countries. But I think they're very thoughtful questions. And so that was the method. So we worked on the survey. They called the survey company to work with us and explain to us how this would all be analyzed. So it's a very lengthy, detailed and painstaking process. It took us about a year and a half to get the whole first report out. And now we're on a roll. We know what to do.
Okay.
So we looked at the first one. For instance, the war in Ukraine in the first report, it had zero resonance for Brazil, South Africa and India. Zero.
Okay.
The war in Ukraine had 90% resonance for Germany. It's not our war. Everybody felt that.
Yeah.
And so this year, even the war in Gaza, it actually has very little resonance. South Africa has taken Israel to court.
I know.
It has some resonance there.
Yes.
But otherwise, it's their war. It's not our war. And so the questions started being a little bit different, right?
Okay.
They started looking at how we changed some of these questions because we understand that just now, with the world in a mess, they started to look to what the middle powers or emerging middle powers were doing and how we were thinking. And so we asked different kinds of questions, and you'll see some of those. For instance, which is the most important entity that makes your foreign policy? In some areas, everybody had a different question. In India, it was classic. Foreign ministry makes our foreign policy. But,
Okay.
in other countries, the president makes it. The ruling in South Africa, the ruling party makes it. We were surprised that this was even a question, but it was an important question.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yes.
And so these are the kind of things that we've done. We then released this report actually in Bandung this year.
Okay.
Because we felt that the findings of this report really started resonating with the first, the non-aligned movement that has taken place. So Bandung had 2 very significant children. One was the non-aligned movement.
Yes.
And the second was the G77.
Mm.
These groupings are still there.
Yes.
And none of us believe that, sometimes you have some people that said that in the questions that international institutions shouldn't be reformed, they should just be thrown out and new ones be started. Well, we know in the developing world, building institutions is hard.
It's very hard.
It's hard.
Yes.
The West does it. The reason they're so advanced is because they do it very well. There's an extremely deep and knowledgeable understanding of the public about what institutions mean, and they participate in it wholeheartedly. The education system is geared towards it. The future is viewed through the research of institutions. We don't have that.
We do not have that.
Yeah, we do not have it, and we need to develop it because,
Yes.
right, no research, no ideas, no future.
True.
And so these institutions were built. So when we worked on these reports, we understood very well that for us the institution building was very important. So you can't just throw out the United Nations, but you've got to work really hard to reform it.
Yes.
Now, the established order, the rules-based order, doesn't want to reform it because those rules work very well for them.
Indeed.
And they still do. They're unfair rules,
Mm.
but it has to be reformed because now it's not working for them either.
Mm.
And so we believe in reform of the multilateral system.
Uh-huh.
You don't just kill the World Bank, but you make sure that the World Bank starts addressing things that are important to a vast majority of the world that doesn't necessarily look like it.
Right.
Unfortunately, also, it is because the advanced world is so they're so postmodern. Right? They've forgotten that for them, things really. For instance, the World Bank, the cooperative movement found no mention in the World Bank for decades. I mean, it's taken them maybe a decade, 10 years now, or 15 years now, where they talked about the cooperative movement and what that means in terms of GDP numbers and growth, etc.
Right.
Informal economy found no place in the IMF numbers. It just never did. So for us, these are very important. These statistics are very important. Unfortunately, even with the new banks that we have started, which is the NDB and even China's bank, the AIIB, there's still not great studies being done on the informal economy, A, and B, on services, on the services sector, because our world is so human capital intensive
Yes.
that we need to start making sure that all these numbers, services, etc., are not properly sort of distinguished and put down as to be included in the overall economic growth of a country.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So whose fault is it that this is not done yet? I mean, in the newer banks as well. Are we partially to blame for that?
Of course, we have actually not participated in the NDB at all.
Okay.
Even in the it's a new development bank. We've not even done a great job. There was IPSA before. There was BRICS. There was IPSA, which is India, South Africa, and Brazil. It had a fund. Never did anything with it. BRICS came along. The two R and C.
Yes.
They basically hijacked everything from the IPSA agenda. So BRICS became very strong, but even the BRICS Bank doesn't do this. So we need to start thinking, unless we can invest in these institutions, our middle powers are just going to be emerging. They're not
So we need to
actually
be
going
part of setting the agenda, not just
That's
participating.
right. And we need, exactly. And Abhijit, for a very long time, we've been saying this at Gateway House, we wrote about it. Before the BRICS Bank came, India is a country of nerds. We love numbers.
Yeah.
We love research. We don't have that many research institutes. What we need to do, since BRICS is so important, everyone knows now, while the Biden administration was in charge and things weren't, it looked like the United States was also falling off with its version of the liberal agenda. And BRICS became so important that the 44 countries were in line to join it.
Yes.
We'd been saying that we need to start a BRICS Research Institute in Mumbai.
In Mumbai.
In Mumbai. We need to start collecting statistics, right? We need to become the OECD of the other world. The OECD is advanced countries. Chile was one of the developing countries that got into the OECD list, has fallen off again. I was looking at some of the OECD numbers recently. It's really the same group of countries that are now in it, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, etc. But none of our countries are in it. But what OECD has decided to do, we're kind of invitee countries to go and sit in on the OECD. That's not enough. We need to be part of those numbers, and they have to change the way they calculate things in order to make it more inclusive. Inclusive is not gender inclusive. Inclusive means inclusive of the way economies currently run. And therefore, India has a great opportunity and should not be in Delhi. It has to be in Bombay. And you've been to New York, Abhijit. You've seen how the UN is. sitting on the East River, flags of all these countries.
Yeah.
Just picture it.
Mhm.
A fantastic BRICS or a developing world OECD, call it what you like, a research center sitting on the Arabian Sea in line with the Reserve Bank of India, which is such a trusted institution, right?
Yes.
And the Navy, with the flags of these developing countries flying.
I can picture it.
You can picture it. I mean, the Brazilians have the best economists. They'll all come. The South Africans are really good on development. I mean, we can get everybody from the non-OECD world.
So what's
to come
stopping
and
us from doing
participate.
this?
We don't have the understanding at
The
the
vision.
political level. Yeah, political level of doing it. Maharashtra has started a think tank, a government think tank called Mitra.
Okay.
I mean, the first thing that happened, they spent money on renting a place and got into trouble because they spent several crores on renting a space. They got into trouble because it was not regular. And so that's not the point. The point is you have to start funding university chairs. There's lots of new universities that are coming up, but they're not funding studies areas. You need everybody. Indian companies, I mean, they give a lot of money. The top 5 Indian companies give money to Stanford University for chairs, etc.
Yes.
It is a disgrace that they do not fund a single Indian. I don't know, maybe one of the 2 of the IITs has a chair for IT. There should be hundreds of thousands of IT chairs, hundreds of thousands of chairs for pharmaceuticals,
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
everything,
Yes.
history. I mean, we have it all.
We have all the money. We have the institutions, the
That's
IITs,
right.
whatnot. Why not fund?
And second tier
research.
and third tier institutions
Yeah.
in the West.
Yes.
Their second, third, fourth tier colleges are well funded and they have specializations that nobody can compete with, not even their top colleges. This is how to grow a country's wealth. And
Yeah.
I think Indonesia is starting to do some of that. Brazil is starting to do some of that. Argentina is starting to do some of it. We are really lagging behind. Unfortunately, the companies that are now dominant in India, that on top of the top 100 companies list on the Economic Times or Business Today or wherever it is, these are the 1991 children, right? You had the Bombay Club
Yeah.
that was pre-1991. Then all these Indian companies that really did so well and competed in 1991, they're now the new Bombay Club. They don't really want anybody in. They're the ones causing protectionism for trade. And we need that next level of Indian company that is not beholden to anybody and not in with the government or the old chambers of commerce, to start thinking differently. And I hope, Abhijit, these are your listeners. I hope that they're listening and they will think about, it's not much to fund a professor,
Yeah, indeed.
right?
Indeed.
To
yes.
study chemistry and, to study new kinds of plastics, new kinds of, why should we depend on the West to tell us what to do with, digital manufacturing? We can do it on our own.
Yes, we can.
And so I hope that this is what the emerging powers will do so that we can become, middle powers.
I
Because
completely
I
agree, yeah.
don't think that there's no desire with all these companies to become great powers. They know great powers.
The
it's a
ambition is
dangerous
lacking,
game.
isn't it?
Yes, but it's not required to be a great power. Right? China really wants to be a great power, but not because it wants to be a great power, because it wants to compete with the US.
Well, there's no harm in being a
There
great
is
power.
no harm in being a great power. But India, it's not India's way. We're not seeking greatness, but we can envelop the world in greatness.
I'm sure there are plenty of people within India who seek greatness,
Yes, they
but the
do.
system doesn't want greatness. The way things are, it's not geared for greatness.
We need our corporate sector to step up with imagination. They have had such a good run. It's time now for them. They don't even invest in startups. They just don't. I mean, the US is great because they're great companies, big companies invest in small guys,
Yes.
and they make them great. They don't do that here.
That culture isn't there here.
It's no culture, no imagination, and also, it's the first time they've seen a lot of money, and so maybe they don't want to share it.
make more.
Yeah,
Make more.
exactly. They'll make more if they do share it. But
No, I was really disappointed when Starlink came into India. I mean, why don't we have a GeoLink or Airtel Link,
Exactly.
our own constellation of satellites, launched by ISRO? We have everything, all the
We have
ingredients in place,
everything,
but we don't have the vision. Anyhow,
we could talk about this forever.
I know. So what are the interesting findings that you have in the report?
So you have actually found quite a few. You've sent us a list of
Yeah.
a list of questions. So let me tell you one of them is the rise of China.
Yes.
The rise of China has been positively viewed by the Brazilians and the South Africans, partly because they are completely dependent on China trade with China. Germany and India completely not. We do not have a positive view of China at all, and that has not changed.
Okay.
Then we've got 52% of Indian respondents prefer India to be neutral. We do not want to be involved in the China-US rivalry. And that, I think, has been quite remarkable because we are now more sure that we don't want to be part of that than we were before. So last year, I think it was 38%. This year, it's 52%.
That's a big change.
It's a big change.
Yes.
It's a big change. We really, and part of it, I think the reason that India sees it that way is we see our own evolution. We don't want anything setting it back.
That's right.
And to become a pawn in anybody, which is why we don't want to be. The great thing about middle powers is, and particularly countries like India, we don't have alliances. We have partnerships with countries.
Indeed.
And so alliance means you help somebody no matter what. It's a
Yes.
do or die.
It's a contractual kind of thing,
It's
isn't it?
yeah, but it's also a commitment. It's an emotional commitment. We don't have that. We
Yeah.
have partnerships. We're not going to help somebody out if they go to war. That's your war, not
That's
our
your war. That's right.
And that is very different from the old powers to the new powers. So that's something. About the rise of the US and the rise of China, I would say the majority of countries see them both as a not as a positive. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
It's not a positive. And on climate change, now because Mr. Trump is in and he said that this is ruining industrialization in his own country, and he's right in some sense, because the climate agenda had become too extreme, and that's
Yes.
why what we did was everybody exported the dark skies and the smokestack industries to China, and so everybody in the US and in Europe has blue skies,
Yes.
but they don't have any jobs, and so climate change, I think, by all the countries has been viewed less positively.
Okay.
But for Brazil, it's a very big issue.
Okay.
And that's partly because Brazil has the Amazon.
Indeed, yes.
And they are very concerned. There's a tremendous amount of deforestation taking place.
Yes.
Developers in the Amazon. And so they are very, very concerned. For them, that is one way of getting world attention and their own attention to it. And they say that still, despite this, a large number of the respondents in most of the countries say that their own country is not spending enough to protect the environment.
Okay.
I think that everybody can agree on.
I think we can all
We are
agree on that.
definitely not doing enough. And in terms of reform of international institutions, coming back to it, although we all want it, we all think it's just not going to happen because the keepers of the order
Yes.
are not going to allow it to happen.
Yeah.
And so we're not in favor of creating the new institutions because even with the NDP, etc., we've not been able to do very well. And even with BRICS, we're not that sure that we want so many people. We're not sure about the agenda that both China and Russia bring, which is the de-dollarization agenda. India is not that, as Mr. Jaishankar likes to say, and I think the rest of the world is starting to pick up on that, is that we're not anti-West, we're just non-West.
We're non-West. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. We have our own way of doing things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that neutrality has become something that has been quite interesting. So they are not, they don't feel that this international order is going to be reformed anytime soon. But that means that all of us have to make the effort to do it. That means think tank like ours, shows like yours have to think and discuss and research ideas about what it will take to reform these institutions.
That's right.
Right? What has happened very interestingly to the UN, the UN just now is it's not even an aid agency anymore. The head of the UN is a meaningless job. It's not, it doesn't really command the kind of respect that it used to.
Yeah.
But the United Nations is has been dominated. China did very well. It dominated the top positions.
It
in
infiltrated the UN
It
deeply.
did, exactly. Well, you have a new infiltrator now. China's got what it could. The UN is not that useful to it.
Yeah.
But it has a new infiltrator, and that is the Western philanthropic organizations.
Oh, well. Okay.
So you've heard that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is now the largest donor to WHO.
Well,
what does that mean? It means that they run the health agenda for the world. That even if India is on those committees, even if the head of the WHO is an Indian, it's going to make no difference because the funder is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and what they say goes. And so these have to be, we have to be very careful because the West isn't going to give up power that easily.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to reform, it wants to control. And if this starts happening, the World Trade Organization has already kind of become non-functional. And India has a big role to play in that, by the way, because we have also not worked hard to make sure that it functions. We don't, we've not complained enough, we've not nominated enough people, we have a nice, fantastic mission in Geneva, but we need to start carrying our weight.
Right.
We need to say, we are getting into new trade regimes, we're getting into global trade regimes. We've got IMEC, which is really it's going to be all about trade.
Yes.
How can you do it if you don't have a functional international trading system?
That's right.
Right? You can have a bilateral investment treaty that says if you have problems, you can get into arbitration, but that's not, I mean, that's not sophisticated.
We need a superstructure.
Yes, you need a superstructure, and you need, when a country is trying to, like China, when they try and dump, you've got to have a place to go to, and you need a decision. So unfortunately, the WTO has become like our court system, which is endless backlog, not enough judges, etc. So we need to start playing a very important role, and we have to start watching out for these philanthropies that are taking over the funding of these global institutions. If we don't want them to happen, then we have to be extremely active and proactive.
So how do we combat something like that? I mean, do we push in more money? Is that one way of doing it?
We have to push in more ideas.
More
We
ideas.
don't have, we have almost no trade think tanks in India. Commerce Ministry has one or two good ones. We don't have law colleges teaching trade. We don't have people talking about negotiations. We have, when you had a typical trade negotiation, it used to be typically you had, 1.5 sort of secretary in the government. Their undersecretary and one steno. Faced with, say, if it was something with the United States, scores of lawyers who act on behalf of the US government and are enabled to start making decisions on trade. We can't compete
So no
with that.
contest.
It's no contest.
Yeah.
So consequently, all this while, all that India's been doing is play defensive. It's not that we need to play offensive, but we have a stake in the system.
Yes.
We've got a stake in the future. And we have to be able to, A, state what it is we want, go for it, and be able to protect it. Right? It's not, we don't want to eat somebody else's lunch.
True.
We just want to have our fair share.
That's right.
And so all this will only happen if the educational system is geared around it. So the new education policy now allows for foreign foreign colleges to come in, university to come in.
Yeah.
We need to be very careful. Why get Harvard? For what? Our students are
wonder
already
why.
going. Yeah, our students are already going there. It's not that they have. Oh, I'll tell you something interesting. I was having a chat with. We've been trying to really focus on the U.S.-India study area. So we were discussing. We were having conversation with several U.S. Entities, some universities, and some centers about how we can have a U.S.-India study area and a partnership for that. And I always ask a question, especially of the universities, about how their business school works.
Okay.
So I ask, so what does your business school exactly teach? What's the specialization of your business school? And the answer is inevitably this: marketing and finance.
Marketing and finance.
Now, this is a business school. They do not teach manufacturing. They don't teach logistics. They don't teach supply chains because those are all gone. Everything is outsourced to China. China has the manufacturing know-how. They teach it to their own business schools. They do not teach it to anybody else because these are state-run institutions. They don't do it. But this is the problem. We don't have, the US has lost its manufacturing, it's even lost its study of manufacturing. How are they going to get it back? But they're trying to do it, right? They're trying to understand. The US is a very adaptable and quick country.
Yes.
They will start introducing these programs very fast.
Yes.
We have to be just as fast.
Well,
We've
we
got to
aren't.
be-
That's the problem.
Yes. We have to start getting trade courses everywhere. Every business school should have it. Every law school should have it. The art of negotiation. How do you negotiate?
Very important.
Right?
Yeah.
Our lawyers are learning on the job with the government. The government is learning on the job. Why? Let's just study it. So all these foreign universities coming in, bring your trade negotiators, bring your trade, bring in your manufacturing teachers. That's what we need to do.
We need to set the agenda as to what we
Exactly.
want,
What
what sort
we
of
want.
knowledge we want. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's what.
Exactly.
We don't want your liberal arts and
That's right.
culture and all that
Yes,
stuff.
we don't
need
want it.
that.
Yes, exactly.
Teachers STEM, teachers
Exactly.
negotiation, teachers whatever you mentioned.
That's right.
That's what needs to
The
happen.
new laws, and we need to be quick about writing all the new laws. We need to be writing new laws for us, which will then, Abhijit, become the laws that other countries that are like us will look at.
True.
So, right, Southeast Asia, South America, South Asia, Africa, even some parts of Eastern Europe. They've sort of gone into the EU because that was closest to them.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why they can't look at us because we have similar conditions. Central Asia, we have to not now, I think, and India is outgrowing that, not being too much in awe of the advanced world because the advanced world is now starting to look a little bit like us.
It's in decline. You can see
Yes,
it very visibly.
yes,
Right.
yes.
So what else did this report bring out? I mean, what's the role of Brazil in South Africa especially?
The role of Brazil in South Africa, I think, let me see. Brazil in South Africa, I don't know whether they have that. Is there a particular question? Brazil is more really preoccupied with
So 80% of Brazilians and 60% of South Africans and 56% of Indians
yes.
View EU trade practices as unfair.
Oh yes, that's
So,
a good one.
yeah.
And US too.
And US too.
Yes. So this brings us back to our trade conversation.
Right.
Yes, indeed, because part of it is they always say this is what we want, what you're gonna, not what you're gonna give us. So this is not just particular to India; it is to everybody. They do view it as unfair, and it's interesting that the EU, the Germans, view China's trade practices as unfair, which is they're getting it right back from them. But yes, this is true. It is across the board, so we can see that there is very much a need for. You really pointed out to the right number that this is it. We need more effective. Now, Brazil has been compelled to go to China. China needs the raw materials that Brazil has.
Yeah.
But the United States has been so beastly with South America. They've really created coups.
Oh, yes.
They've demolished their financial systems. They've, put sanctions on them, etc.
I mean, all those cartels. Who's the client?
Yes.
Who's the client?
Exactly.
Who are they exporting all that stuff to?
Exactly. And so they have they have. This is, I think, South America is starting to emerge from this. Brazil, particularly, it's been hard, but now that there is the rest of the world that they can be part of, they are starting to emerge from it. And the arrival of Milei has in Argentina has been absolutely integral to this change and this increasing confidence of a continent that has always been subjected and been created as the playground of the U.S. financial companies.
Over a century of the Monroe Doctrine.
Yes,
Yeah.
it has been really detrimental to them, and you can see still Venezuela is under sanctions. There is no need to create this. So although we propagate that maybe India should impose sanctions on Pakistan, because we can see how it cripples countries. But I would say that the US sanctioning on all these countries, in fact, we're coming out with a piece of research on how many countries the US has sanctioned. So here's the number for you. If the United Nations has 190 countries, out of these 190, 33 countries are sanctioned by the US. That's 1/6
Okay.
of
As
the
of
world.
today.
As of today,
I see. Wow.
is sanctioned by the US. And the most sanctioned country within which the entities and people are sanctioned is Russia.
Okay.
And Russia has 9,000 sanctions against it. 9,000 entities have been sanctioned.
Okay.
And the US has a list of laws and legislation on sanctions, which are really very interesting to see. They have scores and scores of sanctions laws. They've got CAATSA, which is the main sanctions law. And then they've got all kinds of new ones which are specific to those countries. So they not only put a blanket sanction on a country, they then take the knife and turn it into you because they've named you as being, it'll be the law of the sanctions of Venezuela law, Iraq law, etc., etc.
I see.
Right? And then the sanctions never get lifted. Sanctions are never lifted. There is talk now about lifting sanctions from Syria, but that's because they think they have a pliable
It's a
entity
client,
in
isn't it?
Syria, right? Who is going after the Christians, the Druze,
Yeah, the Druze
as we
is
speak,
above
and
it.
as the US is saying, we lift sanctions off Syria. I mean, it's just, if they just lifted the sanctions off Iran, everything would end.
Yeah.
Everything would end. I'm just not sure. I think the deep state in the US is so very deep and so very belligerent. It's become its nature. And it is unable, even though Marco Rubio has said, this is the unipolar world was only, that term only applied during the Cold War. Now it is no longer relevant that there will be pockets of multipolarity around the world, and that's the way the world will be. Even though they have said it, it's very hard for them to dismantle that edifice of America the Great, or even Europe the Great.
Well, Europe was an extension of the US. I mean,
is,
the
that's
only real power in Western Europe was the US. Even
That's
still is the US.
That's right. That's right.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've written this article with Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia about multipolarism, right?
Yes.
So what is that article about? It just came out, right?
Yes, it came out in the Indian Express yesterday. So it's been interesting. Multipolarity. So there are three terms: unipolar, which is one country rules the world; bipolar, two countries rule the world; multipolar, which many countries. The world has many poles. We believe in a multipolar world, right? And Bandung believed in a multipolar world.
Yes.
We have tried to explain that multipolarity never went away. Unipolarity is dated. Bipolarity creates conflict.
It does. We saw that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we saw that, right, you saw that with the US and Soviet Union.
Yes.
Now it's the US and China.
New Cold War is
New
emerging.
Cold War is emerging.
Yeah.
That's right. And the world needs more countries to participate and stand up so that it doesn't get tilted one way or the other. There are two or three things. There are many elements to this. It's multipolarity.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is alignment and non-alignment, right? Non-alignment means you're aligned to nobody, and you've heard people talk about it. So India is multi-aligned, etc., etc.
Yes.
Alignment really comes out of being aligned, having alliances, that we are aligned with nobody, but we will have engagements and partnerships with certain countries. The aligned world now is only with the West. And unfortunately, because of what is happening with Russia, Russia is now having strategic partnerships. We can see with North Korea, where
Yes.
soldiers are fighting with them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another kind of a NATO.
I think this
That-
week itself they made the admission.
That's
that
right.
It's happening.
That's right.
Yeah.
And with I mean, that's what NATO was about, right? You attack one of us, you attacked us all, and
That's
therefore
right.
we'll come to your help.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, that NATO concept is now getting replicated in other parts of the world because there's no other way to try and get support for what is an unnecessary war. And I don't think that's a very good idea for these alliances to be to really exist. If countries want to help, they can help in many ways. We've seen what happened with the US. They gave arms to Ukraine, even though that is really NATO at war with Russia.
Yes. It's a proxy war, isn't it?
It's a proxy war,
Yes.
absolutely. And so alignment, non-alignment, there are so many of these terminologies now floating around. But I think that the polar one is the most significant. And if we talk about the unexpectedness of what was a bipolar world, which was China, helped by the US, that came out of the US experiment called globalization.
Yeah.
right? The EU had a project. It was a wonderful project. They said, we're going to come together. We've been fighting with each other after the Second World War. We're going to come together. We're going to have a common currency, very started by Robert Mundell, the economist. We're going to have the euro. It was going to be peace all around, but then the US was going to defend them, right? And that's how they
That was
could
the
have
deal.
this. That was the deal.
Yeah.
And that has fallen apart
Yes.
because they now cannot have their welfare state and they cannot have their defense either. But really, does the world need defense? I mean, really? We're trying to create a peaceful world. When was the last time you heard the word peace come out of anybody's mouth, except until Trump started saying that he wanted peace? Otherwise, the advanced world was just about war. Even
Yes.
Japan had stopped talking defense. Even they helped provide weapons to Ukraine, which is
Well, Japan does what they're told, and they have no choice, unfortunately.
it is unfortunate.
Yes.
Japan could very easily have stayed on the side of Asia, but it worries about China.
Yeah.
And so that has been some of the problems. So these terms are all, you're going to hear neutral, non-neutral. You're going to hear a lot about these terms as the world turns and starts to reform itself into a new way. And we hope that our studies, our surveys can start to throw some light by asking very specific questions to 4 very significant countries in the world. We hope this can throw light on how the world is changing and which direction it should take.
So, what do you see happening? Which direction do you see the world going in as of today? It's changing very rapidly.
It is changing very rapidly. I do see it as a world that will have multiple centers of power in multiple countries that will start to take their place in the world. It will take something for them to say, intellectually, we are now going to write these new rules. In fact, Gateway House is starting a study where we're trying to understand what these new rules are and take a stab at writing some of these new rules.
Okay.
At least think about what it is that we want. And surveys like this certainly help us to understand what we should be thinking about. That's one thing. The other thing that I know we haven't addressed this, so those rules will start to be written. What works best for countries that are like ours? And so by focusing just on, say, India, Indonesia, And using these questions as a base, we can start thinking about the new rules that need to be written. When you do reform of the United Nations, what are the things that have to be done? The UN, unfortunately, has become all the issues, not all the things that the West wanted to be, which is the liberal agendas. These have all crept in. Not even environment, the climate change movement.
Yes.
They've crept into the UN agenda. It's also crept because the UN was so inadequate. It's also crept to the G20 agenda, unfortunately. And South Africa, which is just now the G20 president, is having a very hard time trying to tear apart what G20. The G20 is there to prevent another financial crisis.
Yes, the late 90s thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, which is how the G7 really became the G20 and then separated itself again with G8 rather.
G8, yes.
And it's now become completely drowned by agendas of inclusivity and climate change, etc. So I think they're trying to understand, because these are all very well, but then you get bogged down with saying, how can we do climate change if we don't have the tools and the funding to do it? We don't even have an industry. You're telling us to convert our existing small industry into something modern, but not helping us with it.
Yes. That's
So
right.
these things are very, very. These things, I think, I can see. I think the G20. What we're going to see, I think one of the poles of the world is going to start trying to reform itself, and that's the United States. It has just gone back into participating in some of the G20 meetings.
Okay.
But it's going to be the president of the G20 next year.
I see. Okay.
Yes. I think that we will see the United States playing a weighty role in the G20, which is really to prevent and maybe taking it back from a United Nations agenda into the agenda that the G20 is supposed to do, which is to prevent another financial crisis. We're going to see some new rules, geo-economic rules being written
Okay.
by the United States. Just like India is pretty unexpected. You don't know what Mr. Modi is going to do. The US has become pretty unexpected. We don't know what those will be, but I'm pretty sure that they will be worth considering.
Okay.
And so those new rules, we'll get an indication of what some of those new rules, maybe some of the reformed rules will be like. And in the meanwhile, all of us are going to try and put our mind to thinking about what the new world, I don't want to say order, what the new world will look like, what is in the interest of many. We will go back to the Bandung Principles and think about what they said, try and extrapolate it to today.
Today's world?
Yes. And I don't want to say reinterpret, but see what's relevant
Yes.
and see how we can apply it.
Because right now, the way we see the way I see the world, it seems to be bifurcating. There's one order, which is the Russia-China order,
Yes.
and then there's the Western order, and other nations like us, we're kind of in the middle somewhere, aren't we?
Yes, we are. We are in the middle. The Russia-China order, last month we were in Moscow, and the alliance between the
Understanding.
relationship and the understanding between India and Russia is far greater than that between China and Russia.
Oh, that's true.
It's not a natural fit.
It's not a natural fit.
Yes.
They're actually natural adversaries.
Yes.
For China and Russia.
Yes, they're not a natural fit.
Yes.
And so, but unfortunately, as the US has thrown them together, and so they're making the best of a bad bargain.
Yes.
China is the greatest beneficiary of this.
Of course.
And Russia is biding its time.
Yes.
I think that, what was the question you asked?
The world is bifurcating.
Oh, bifurcating,
And
yes.
Where do we
Yes.
stand?
Where do we stand?
Yeah.
We will be in the middle somewhere. And some of our attributes will be those attributes of a very advanced world. Some of the attributes will be attributes of a middle world. And some of the attributes will be attributes of a lower middle world.
We are living in all three worlds.
Yes,
right
we're
now.
living in all three worlds at the same time. China is not going to be our friend
Okay. No.
not in the near future and not even in the distant future. It's unfortunate because we do have a lot in common. We have a lot to learn from China.
We do have a lot in common with
Yes.
them, actually.
Yes.
I mean,
We're
so
the
many
only
ways.
two big countries, 1.45 billion population.
Yeah.
We've developed in a certain way. China has developed. A trip to China last year taught me that China has a lot to learn from us. They are very disciplined, and we have
True.
that to learn from them.
Oh, absolutely.
They have built their intellectual capacity to great heights.
They have invested trillions of dollars in
Yes.
their education system.
Yes.
1980s onwards.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they have imported professors from,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
paid them well. We are not doing that.
We can just emulate their playbook. That's all we need to do.
Exactly.
They have had a step-by-step plan.
Exactly.
1,000 talents program and
Exactly.
whatnot they've got. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We literally have to do it. But their state and their state companies participated. Ours do not.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say we're independent of government. It's not okay to say we're independent of India.
True.
And our companies really need to learn that. The CSR rule, Abhijit, this is an uneducated opinion. I feel though that Indian companies did much more before CSR came along. And they were much more philanthropic and much more feeling for the country and people. The CSR rule kind of lets everybody off the hook.
Yeah.
You just give that certain amount of money and that's it.
That's it. We're done.
Yeah, you're done. You don't have to do anything more because your duty is done. I feel that Indian companies need to start feeling again and really thinking about the national interest. They act more like American companies, multinationals, bigger than the country. But those companies were multinationals when the United States was the unipolar world. I mean, it was a unipolar world.
Yes.
We're not that. We're still very small fry. So enough of the Indian companies, but we will be somewhere in the middle. And that's a very nice place to be.
Do you think we'll be asked to make a choice by someone, either with us or against us, that sort of thing? I mean, I remember George Bush saying such things back in the day.
Yes. We've been very adept at sidestepping those questions. We have an excellent foreign minister who knows how to vocalize and articulate very, very well. He made an interesting statement when there was talk within BRICS about de-dollarization. He said just because there's a multipolar world, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be we don't have to have a currency that has to be multi-currency too. It doesn't have to be a multi-currency world. And he also said that the problem in our region is that we don't have enough dollars. So we're going to So he knows how to sidestep and India knows how to sidestep these questions. I think we've already been asked by the US. Are you with us?
I'm pretty sure we have.
With the Russia war, we've already been asked. The Europeans have asked us. And somehow or the other, we have managed to convince them that asking India to make a choice is not the correct thing to do because we're in no position to make a choice. And so somehow our diplomacy has been great. And we have been able to convince them that they should not ask us to make a choice. And even if someone does ask us, we're not going to make it.
So these questions, this survey, do you think you need to expand it to more nations?
Good question. Surveys are very expensive.
I know.
And we'd love to expand them. We hope. Unfortunately, Europe just now is seeing a negative growth. The funders, unless they find that they can expand the survey, we hope they will. There are other middle powers. They come. Maybe if we can get a funder from India to. And maybe Brazil and South Africa to lend a hand and help to fund some of this. Maybe we can expand it to other countries too. That would be really great, and it would be helpful for Indian companies or foundations to participate in this because we've learned a lot from the Koba Foundation. They are very methodical and extremely open-minded.
I see.
That's been a revelation for us.
So is there going to be a new report next year?
Yes. And we don't know whether there'll be more countries added in it or not.
Okay.
But the questions will be different.
They'll evolve.
They will evolve. There will be new questions. Old questions will take on different hues, different wordings. We think that it'll be a year since Mr. Trump has been in power.
Yes.
We don't know whether the wars will end.
Uh-huh.
We hope they will.
We hope they will.
That means a new world. We don't know how the trade era and the trade wars just now are going to work out. We don't know whether the US will reindustrialize. We don't know how China will manage its population, that is youthful population that is lying flat still, unwilling to participate. So we don't know how these things. But there's lots of things that are up in the air, and for India, as it steps out into the world for the first time, really since we
1,000 years.
decolonized, we're really now decolonized country with a new generation that most born after 1947. We don't know how we're going to work out this year, and which direction we'll move. Hopefully, it'll be in the direction of more engagement with the world, balanced engagement, which we already have. We've had kind of reticence engagement, but we need a more balanced and outward-looking agenda.
So what else is Gateway House working on this year?
We're working on several things. We're looking at, as usual, always Chinese investment in India. We're looking at Chinese investments in our neighborhood. It's been extremely interesting to see how that has been 10 years after Belt and Road. It's not worked out very well.
It hasn't quite.
It hasn't. And some of the countries, most of our countries, it's especially Sri Lanka, Pakistan, now Bangladesh, and even Nepal. I think Nepal has been the smartest. They said, we don't want any of your infrastructure if you're giving us a loan. You have to give it to us as a grant. So Nepal has been quite smart. Bangladesh is learning some of that.
Okay.
That's one of the things we're working on. We're also trying to understand the role religion plays in our daily lives.
Okay.
And particularly in foreign policy. It's been quite interesting because the activation of religion has really changed global politics. So Islam has changed global politics.
Yes.
Liberalism, which is I don't know how to say it. It's been the West. There was a recent Pew survey that showed just last week that millions were leaving the Christian faith.
Okay.
And the Buddhist faith. They would just become religion-less.
You can see it's very visible in the West, isn't it?
It's very visible in the West. So what has happened is that they have left their church, okay? And that's why Trump is so particular about talking about Christian values, right? They've left the church and they've adopted this new faith called liberalism.
I know. You need something to fill the vacuum, right?
Yes, and it has become fundamentalist, which is why the Europeans and the US just now really cannot understand why the world has to be not like them, why climate is part of that fundamentalist liberalist agenda. They don't understand it because it has become a religion for them.
Yes, it has.
So although they're escaping from one, they bought into another. That is a huge problem. I don't know how many people are leaving Buddhism, but that's what the Pew survey said. I will go back and see it in some more detail.
So which countries were covered in this Pew survey?
A lot of the world.
Okay.
And sort of the Western world. Yeah.
I can understand Buddhism declining in South Korea, for example.
Yes.
Makes
I think
sense.
yes.
Because Christianity is moving.
Yes, exactly. Yes. But what they don't have, because they have not been able to do that, is that Buddhism is on the rise in China.
Yeah.
And we had on very good authority, in the middle of the COVID, we had a visitor who explained that according to his extremely informed calculations, there was an estimated 300 Buddhists in China.
300 million.
300 million, sorry.
That's
Buddhists
so
in
it's
China.
the largest Buddhist country in the world, essentially.
I would say that. And 50 million Christians, out of which 10 million were Catholic. That's why China did a deal with the Pope, Vatican, to say we will appoint our own bishops here.
Okay.
And the Vatican was willing to go with it because they were also losing their flock. So leaving Christianity, maybe leaving Catholicism, but China is definitely on the rise. Last year in China, I did a travel. We traveled by train and rode across from Beijing over to Chengdu
Okay.
on the western side, on the eastern side, western side, and southern side. Chengdu, etc., part of the old trade route.
Xanadu.
Yes, and I found along the villages, they all had a little spire. So I asked some of the locals, what is that? And they said it's the local Tao temple.
Tao Temple. Okay.
Yes, and when I asked my Chinese host, I said, this is very interesting. They also took us, they were trying to have a civilizational dialogue with India because we won't talk to them about contemporary affairs. So it was a civilizational dialogue. We went to all the Buddhist sites. Abhijit, you'll be shocked. I was shocked. They were packed. Young married Chinese people coming to pray.
To pray, not as tourists.
Pray
Okay.
and receive their blessings. How we go to the temple to
No,
get
same
blessings.
way.
Get blessings. Older Chinese, they light the incense. They were doing a Shashtang Namaskar in front of Buddha.
Glad to see.
I was
hear that.
amazed. They are harking back. The old Chinese are harking back to the imperial China days. They wear their dresses called the what is it called? It's the feng shui. It's called the dress where they wear the imperial garb. It was quite amazing. And our Chinese host told us, oh, China now has 3 philosophies. They have Confucianism, they have Taoism, and they have Buddhism.
Okay.
So they're covering it up with Buddhism. And it was very interesting. So the second thing is Christianity. Yes, the traditional Catholics, and you saw it with the Pope just dying, the traditional Catholics have even in South America are leaving. This is being replaced by evangelicals.
Evangelicals. Okay.
And the United States is the primary
Of course.
producer
yes.
of the evangelicals. They have a lot of money.
Right.
You can see it in our northeastern states,
Oh,
and
yes.
even in Arunachal Pradesh, where the evangelicals are huge. Their churches are everywhere.
But how are they getting access to all these regions?
I really don't know. I think we're just not watching. We're so focused on, the Islamic fundamentalism. We're not paying attention to what else is going on.
I mean, they are re-engineering society.
They are
demographic re-engineering.
Yes, they are. And they're doing it in such a way, you must have seen some of these things. They're using the Indian deities to preach.
Very
So,
insidious.
Very insidious. So the
Yes.
priests will wear saffron robes. They will wear the Rudraksh mala, the cross at the end.
Yeah.
And they will have pictures of the Mother Mary holding the Bal Krishna, saying that actually he is of Christian origin.
My question is, why is this being allowed?
I don't
on an
know.
industrial scale?
It is on an industrial scale.
Yes.
It is quite interesting.
Yes.
And it's also frightening because it's a manipulation of the worst kind of
It's an
degree.
assault on civilization.
It is.
Yes.
And so the Chinese are doing a ghar vapsi back to Buddhism.
I'm glad.
And the evangelicals are converting left, right, and center. We have to, I think it's important to study. Islam is starting to see some of the reform that it needs. Palestine, what's happened there, as you know, Joe Biden said right after the announcement of IMEC that the IMEC actually aggravated the October 7th attacks because Palestine thought after the Abraham Accords are signed, no one's going to pay them any attention. And they were right. But the Abraham Accords are going to go ahead. It means that there will be there will have to be some reform in Islam as well. We are seeing some of that. So all of foreign policy is now dependent on the way religion is moving.
Indeed, it's an undercurrent. It's a subcurrent.
It is.
It's not visible on the surface.
Yes, but Islam changing geopolitics, absolutely, because 9/11 happened. I mean, that was visible. For
That was
all
a
to
very
see.
visible change. Yeah.
And Russia is becoming very Christian. You can see the liberal ideology of the West has pushed Ukraine to adopt it, and it has pushed out its own Orthodox church that was born in Ukraine into Russia.
Yes.
Some of the other Eastern European countries that have also adopted it, Latvia, etc., they're also pushing out their Orthodox church and saying, we don't need you. I mean, the world is...
So it's a top-down change that's being imposed top-down.
It is being
change.
imposed. It is imposed top-down because people are very religious. The Orthodox are... I mean, everybody needs something.
You need something, some kind of
you need
guidance,
something.
framework, whatever.
And you need something to hold your soul.
Yes.
Even the liberals have their woke agenda to hold their souls.
Yeah, that's their
So
framework.
it's their religion.
Yes.
So, but this denial of faith is very interesting, and the adaptation of faith is also becoming now very interesting. Countries are being run according to the way they think about their religion. The Saudi Arabia, the monarchy is all trying to reform
Yes.
their Islam.
Mhm.
And if Iran really comes out of the Middle East isolation, we might see a more balanced kind of Islam because the Shia is a little less Qatar.
I hear that over half of Persians no longer follow the religion. I mean, that's what one hears on the street, I'd say.
And they've been welcoming also their Zoroastrian roots.
Yes. But they don't have anyone to guide them about Zoroastrianism.
They need to be reintegrated into the world. And the world needs Iran. It's a clever country. People are beautiful. They're smart. They're civilizational.
Oh yeah, they are our cousins, civilizational
Yeah, that's
offspring.
right. That's right. All the newcomers, the people that emerge in the Middle Ages, they're still newcomers. They don't understand the world as much as we do. But I would say it would just be civilizational. It'd be a great thing to get Iran out of the isolation. And so we're studying the sanctions very, very closely
Okay.
to see how, that's another big area of study for Gateway House, to see how these sanctions are impacting countries, what they mean, what they do, because India has been sanctioned and we know how it feels. It's not great. And you can only do that much import substitution. We see with Iran has now taken on such a role that they've lost their leaders in helicopters because they couldn't get maintenance parts. It's a real sorrow. And in some sense, Russia re-entering the world in terms of making its strategic engagement with Iran, etc., will really help because Russia is very industrialized.
Yes.
They can get new parts. These countries don't necessarily want to buy Chinese goods or Chinese parts. They see what is done to them.
Yeah.
So Russia is much more acceptable. Of course, the US would be great. They're sitting with tons of Boeing planes and no parts.
Yes.
And even the blowing up of the Bandar Abbas part, I mean, part of it is just they don't have the updated equipment. And so it would be good to get them back into the mainstream of the world and create a little more balance.
So how do you study sanctions and the impact?
So
I'm asking a rather technical question, but I'm curious. How do you do that?
3 or 4 things. A, you study the actual sanctions.
The laws.
The laws.
Okay.
Then you study the laws. What are the regulations that govern the laws? What kind of impact do they have? So you study, if for instance, say there is sanctions again. Okay, I'll give you an example. If we were to sanction Pakistan, right? The way to do it is obviously you don't penalize people. These past sanctions are penalizing people. They penalize, the US sanctions penalize individuals.
Yeah.
They penalize companies. And they also penalize countries. The United Nations sanctions penalizes countries. So 2 examples I'm giving you. Pakistan is, the military actually owns everything now. It is
Indeed.
the biggest landlord.
Yes.
60% of business is now the military. And they make everything including cornflakes. So, right? Pakistan has only 2 major exports. One of them is textiles. So what we can do is India can create a legislation. We do not have a sanctions legislation. We create a legislation. We study the regulatory aspect of it. How do you impose it? And how do you penalize for what is the justice system that can penalize for? What we can do, for instance, is we can any multinational company that buys, say, Pakistani textiles, cotton textiles, converts them into sheets,
Mm.
and basically sells them in India. Maybe, I don't know, IKEA or Walmart.
Uh-huh.
I'm just giving you an example.
Yes.
They cannot sell it in India. That's why the country of origin, those details now that you see online, when you buy something online, it says country of origin
That's right.
status.
Mm.
We have to be very strict about that.
Mm.
And if it says cotton sourced from Pakistan, cannot enter the country. Everybody wants India for its market.
Yes.
That's how you penalize. That can be a sanction.
Right.
So you're not necessarily sanctioning the people or any of these companies that if the textile mill is owned by the Pakistani military, cannot enter India.
Right.
That's how you do it.
That's one way to do it.
That's one way to do it. The other part of it is Myanmar. Myanmar has just had a massive natural disaster.
Yes.
Aid, we were not able, lots of countries wanted to send aid. They were not able to do it. The US liberals cried and said US aid is usually first on the spot and now there's no US aid. That is not true. US aid is not always first on the spot. First on the spot is always your country, your neighboring countries. So India was first on the spot. I think China was 2 hours ahead of us
Okay.
because it's there in Myanmar. Its military is there, everyone is there.
Yes.
But a lot of the actual aid were not able to come because Europe had sanctioned, the US has sanctioned Myanmar, Europe has sanctioned Myanmar. Even when Aung San Suu Kyi was in government, they did not remove a lot of the sanctions.
I see.
So at every forum that any one of us at Gateway House goes, we always ask the Europeans, the Americans, why are you sanctioning Myanmar? This is a poor country. Their generals are not living in exile in your country. They're not asking for your help. They've had a disaster. They've got a civil war. Just lift the sanctions. Use this as a chance to lift the sanctions and let them be as a normal country.
Yes.
They won't do it.
What's
They
the
won't-
rationale?
So when we ask the Europeans, why have you sanctioned Myanmar?
Yes.
Because there are no unilateral, there are no multilateral sanctions on Myanmar. It's just a unilateral sanction. Britain, I think, and because Aung San Suu Kyi's husband was from there, and the United States, the answer was with the US sanctioned Myanmar.
Okay. We get it.
I mean, yeah, but why have you sanctioned them? We also got a military government, but why have you sanctioned them?
That's right.
There is no real answer.
Well.
And these are one of the things, but we hope that by doing these kind of papers, this will urge countries to see, and the people, the intellectual community, the scholars, the policymakers, to see that there is no need for these sanctions. Everyone kind of just accepts that the sanctions are there. There's no need to accept it. You have to protest these sanctions.
Right.
And there are times, and we've also learned in our studies that sanctions are never lifted. They are
I see.
never
That's
lifted.
very interesting.
It is, once they're on, it's almost impossible to get them off. They just stay there like debris
I see.
and dirt that in the crevices.
I see.
Because they're so deep rooted that something or the other is always causing the problem. So we hope that when we do this kind of research, it should throw light on how detrimental it is and how hard it is to get rid of them. Easy to impose, hard to get rid of. So,
So that's the research you're doing this year.
yes.
Okay. Any research on India?
On India,
Internally?
we don't do a lot of domestic research.
Domestic research, yeah.
But we are very interested in several other. We're really interested in Indian companies and their role overseas. What kind of role do they play? How they work? How are they good corporate citizens overseas?
Okay.
That requires some kind of survey work, and those are expensive. So we're waiting to get some funding for that. We hope that will work. We're also starting courses for young students.
Oh, wow, really?
Yes, on international affairs this year,
I see.
because we find that the youth, they all do the Model United Nations. During India's G20 year, we did a Model G20 for a school. We did it with the G.B. Pettit School for Girls.
Okay.
And we were, much to our surprise, they took to it immediately. They studied the G20, they knew what it stood for, and they rolled it out very well. We had an inter-school, then G20. There were some 15 or 16 schools that participated. It was really super. So it got us thinking that young students are really interested. They live they're so well informed. They have the world, but it's a good time for them. Our colleges don't offer international affairs.
They don't.
Our schools don't offer international affairs as a study area.
Yes.
We need to. I mean, India is at the center of so much change. And I think we should. So our students are all traveling overseas to study, international affairs at pre-college studies. So we thought that maybe we can do something interesting with that,
Okay.
with school students. Also to understand how much they know, how much they don't know. We found them to be extremely receptive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So we've got exciting things this year. And next year, planning for next year, we'll start thinking in July for 2026. One thing I can tell you, we're definitely studying the US as a G20 president. So
That'll be interesting.
it's going to be very interesting.
Right. Well, thank you for the great work you're doing.
Thank you.
And lovely talking to you.
Great talking to you always, Abhijit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.